Okay. While we let people kind of roll in, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you all for joining us today, and welcome back to CSC's online webinar series. My name is Takuji, and together with Lawrence here, we're the postdoctoral counselors at CSCE. So today, Lawrence and I are really excited to host this panel discussion and webinar on career pathways in EEB, where our aim is to really highlight and explore the wide range of careers people trained in ecology, evolution, and conservation have taken since their graduation. And so our four incredible speakers today have generously agreed to give us insights into their professional journeys and share advice for trainees considering similar paths. So today we'll start off with our four presentations, and afterwards we hope to have plenty of time for questions and discussions with all of our speakers. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Lawrence, who'll introduce our first speaker.
Yes, hello everyone. Echoing that sentiment, welcome. We're so excited to have you. So first up, I'd love to introduce Gillian Chow-Fraser, who holds a master's degree, where she focused on woodland caribou ecology, after which she jumped quickly into the national and provincial conservation nonprofit sector. She's actually currently also a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary, so she went back to her studies. But very excited to hear what she has to say about her most recent uh, diversion into the job market.
Okay, thank you. I'll just start sharing here. Okay, so yeah, thanks for having me today. My name's Jillian, and I'll be sharing a little bit about my journey in the environmental non-government organization, or ENGO, or ENGO space. So before I get into the post grad, I'll first talk about the grad part of my life. So, I did my master's at the University of Victoria in the School of Environmental Studies. That master's was particularly focused on caribou response to anthropogenic features, human activities, all in the eastern slopes of the Rockies in Alberta. So through that master's, I kind of realized that most of my interest was in the application of this research. So both applied research, but also really kind of making the science do the work. Especially in the caribou space, especially in Alberta, it just seemed so evident to me that there was already a lot of research, a lot of science out there about what caribou needed to recover, and that it just wasn't being implemented on the ground. It wasn't reaching decision makers. And so I had actually told my supervisor, so Jake Fisher was my supervisor at UVic, that I wasn't interested in academia anymore. And I really wanted to get into ENGOs because of this appeal of advocacy. And honestly, I think like I just really wanted to put up a fight. Like that was maybe just the personality trait there. So Engos really, really appealed to me, and I knew that. So Jake was amazing, and he actually introduced me to the executive director at the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, or CPAWS, the Northern Alberta chapter. So CPAWS is a regional nonprofit, but it also is national. So it's across Canada with a national office in Ottawa. So I started chatting with this executive director at CPAWS. I was kind of familiar with the work. I really liked the work that they did, very evidence-based. And they actually really wanted a caribou expert, which I kind of like recoiled at the time, the idea of like calling myself an expert at anything out of a master's. But they really wanted someone with that expertise. So I will say the master's did get me my foot in the door with CPAWS. So I started right away as the boreal program manager and then became the director. I was at CPAWS for about 5 years. The work that we did was, it's an advocacy-based organization. We worked on primarily caribou, bison, Indigenous protected and conserved areas, and then issues about the ecological integrity of Wood Buffalo National Park. Um, yeah, so they really wanted me as a material expert that could like kind of credibly represent their concerns in different kinds of processes. Um, from there, I did pivot in the last couple years. I'd been working at the Bulkley Valley Research Centre, so still in this like complex conservation issues space, but I was kind of itching to get back closer to research, as it turns out, and a little bit more refined in scope. So that work there was focused on forestry in BC, particularly working with practitioners, in this case, foresters, on how to increase more sustainable forestry practices and getting away from clear cutting of old growth. So I was an extension specialist, which was a role that had never heard of before I applied for the position. But it's in that like knowledge exchange space. So what they really liked and what was kind of built on from the grad work was this understanding of scientific findings, of scientific literature, and then applying it, being really creative, translating it, repackaging it, and kind of creating these resources that were super practical and usable to foresters. And yeah, as it was mentioned, I did end up going back to school. I am doing a PhD now at the University of Calgary, and which is kind of maybe a whole other conversation of being back in academia after about 8 years in the nonprofit space. But I loved my time with NGOs. I'll give like a pretty brief overview of what my kind of role looked like in that space. So, of course, it was very heavy on the advocacy. At CPAWS was an advocacy-based organization. So, what that actually means is we were running public campaigns, letter writing campaigns, identifying what the problems were, advocating for solutions, pushing folks to engage in that. It was also being a part of collaborative land use planning. So whether that was Indigenous led, government led, or industry led. Uh, Communications was a huge part of it. Of course, public communications in terms of like interviews, media interviews, blogs, press releases, those kinds of things, but also letters and briefs and backgrounders and things like that to decision makers, government planners, government officials. Like it kind of was that whole spectrum of influencers in this space. A big part of it was knowledge exchange and co-creation. So again, those kind of creating materials that were useful and helpful. And I would be remiss if I did not mention so much of this was grant writing and reporting, as like is just common in the NGO space. So if you can write, you're a huge asset. I just want to give a practical example of what this looked like as well, and I'll use caribou since I was first brought on as that caribou expert. So what that kind of looked like was applying what I knew of the scientific literature to really think critically about the plans that were being proposed for how to manage caribou habitat. So again, that kind of application space, communicating that to different audiences. Another, uh, and also a big part of that being kind of in government stakeholder meetings. So they in Alberta had these things called task forces, where so I got to have a seat as an environmental representative at those task forces to be advocating for these credible, scientifically backed measures for caribou habitat. So like in that ENGO space, you get a seat at that table, which is really nice. Other components of that was also supporting Indigenous-led stewardship of caribou. So some of this work was working with Dene, the First Nation, in the northwest of the province. They wanted to develop a monitoring program for their caribou herd there, the Bistro caribou. So I was able to apply some of that work from my master's to the co-development of this monitoring program using Indigenous knowledge, working with the community, working with their Guardians program. That was like a really incredible project that I was fortunate to work on. And this other element that's kind of like being a watchdog. So what happened in the summer of 2021 was that a few trappers came up to us and said that they had received notice of some forestry plans that were going to happen in the fall and that they were really concerned about impacts to caribou habitat. So this kind of brought up this kind of investigatory work that I really liked about the Engo space. So it was like really running with that, digging into that, seeing what was the impact going to be. We did some kind of quick and dirty analyses and realized this would be pretty bad if they went through. This was some analysis we did. You can see the proposed cut blocks in orange on the right, and then on the left, the undisturbed caribou habitat, which is already quite minimal in this range. So if that logging had happened, would have resulted in a 97% loss of undisturbed caribou habitat. So we put together all these other elements that we looked at as well. We made this report and used that to get media attention, to garner public support, to push back against this. We did letter writing. We also used this to meet with government officials, with the forestry company, with decision makers to really ring the alarm that this was happening in this area, bring it back to the community as well. And in this case, it did result in the deferrals of these logging plans, and they created a no harvest area in this. So it was a nice win, a nice example of something that was successful in this province, which was nice. But I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like transferable skills and what is the space, what skills you have that make you really valuable in this space. And I think that a lot of grad students are really well equipped to succeed in the Engo space. Um, Particularly reflecting on my experience, if you're doing applied research, it means that you're already thinking about the implications of management decisions on whole systems, not just ecosystems and all the components of ecosystems, but also those social, cultural, political landscape that these decisions get made on. And so I think that you already kind of come in with a pretty good broad view of what it means for a decision to have implications. If you're writing and presenting, whether that's a thesis and at conferences you're presenting, it means like pretty clearly you're communicating scientific information, which actually is quite a huge need, a huge gap or a huge need in the Engo sector. Like even for me, I was brought in as to be that material expert, right? So if you can communicate that, you're a huge asset in that way. And then you're problem solving all the time in grad school, day to day, week to week, like the entire thesis is problem solving, right? And I think that that's one of your biggest assets. You're applying expertise, you're making observations, asking questions, identifying next steps, whether that's recommendations or critiques or flags that this has to not happen or something like that. Like that can all be very applied to the Engo space. And so I just think that there's huge opportunity and happy to think more about different ways that can be applied. And so I'll wrap it up there just to give time for the other speakers, but I want to say that I didn't put this on my career timeline, but I did reach a career high a couple of years ago when I did ascend to vice presidency of Chapman's Ice Cream briefly during a live morning show when they put the wrong banner under me. And so you just never know what might happen in this space because for a moment I was an ice cream heiress. But I'll wrap it up there. Please reach out if you have any questions. Again, happy to talk about my time at CPAWS and the Research Center and doing the PhD now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gillian. That was really great. So as I said at the beginning, we'll save questions for all our speakers towards the end. But for now, I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Katie Goodwin, who completed her PhD in botany at UBC and is now an applied vegetation ecologist at Swamp Donkey Solutions.
Hello. Okay. Can you guys all see my screen properly? Okay, great. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Julian, for that great talk about the NGO space. I'm going to be talking more a little bit about doing very similar work, but in more from a consulting space. So thanks so much for having me. My name's Katie Goodwin, and I'm really excited to be part of this panel because I really found these kinds of events super helpful when I was in grad school and kind of trying to figure out my career path. And so I hope this is helpful for all of you that are here today. So I'm an applied ecologist with a small company called Swamp Donkey Solutions. I've been in this position for just under a year. And throughout that year, I've had the opportunity to do research and restoration fieldwork in some really beautiful parts of northern BC and Alberta, also doing caribou habitat related restoration work, coincidentally. So what exactly does Swamp Donkey do? We kind of specialize in three main things. So the first is ecosystem restoration. So we will plan, execute, monitor, and improve upon restoration programs in boreal forests of Western Canada. So we specialize in restoring linear disturbances, focusing on addressing kind of site conditions that are arresting and preventing natural recovery to kind of kickstart succession and scale up to restore different ecosystem processes and functions like carbon sequestration of peatlands and also restoring caribou habitat. We mostly work with First Nations, and so our work also often involves a lot of training and knowledge exchange with communities to support internal capacity building to kind of help ensure long-term success of restoration programs. And then we also do ecological research. So we'll design field studies, do different analyses and literature reviews, kind of addressing a variety of research questions, either to inform land management decisions or address community needs or support policy development. So for example, right now, a big thing I've been working on is we're studying how vegetation is recovering following recent fires in Fort Nelson First Nations territory to address community questions about how their land is being affected by these kind of changing fire regimes we're seeing recently, and also to inform the nation's land management decisions. And then lastly, we also support land use planning and negotiations. So for example, if a nation is entering into negotiations with the provincial government or something, we might provide scientific evidence or serve as a scientific expert to support these kind of planning and negotiations between different governments over land use decisions. And so that's kind of what we do. And then within this company, my specific job is kind of sort of like part researcher and part restoration practitioner. So as a researcher, I'm developing and doing these research projects that are aiming to address community needs and also developing research projects to kind of address knowledge gaps that are kind of inhibiting or blocking us from doing effective restoration practices. And then on the other hand, as a restoration practitioner, helping plan and implement and monitor restoration programs. I might be training operators because a lot of the restoration work involves, as you can see in this photo, an excavator. I obviously don't operate an excavator, but I will help work with an excavator operator to make sure they're doing their work in a way that is supporting natural recovery of the system. And treatments are being applied in a way that will help kickstart succession. And we'll also be working with land guardians as well in that same like capacity building environment. And so overall, this position, I think, gives like a really cool opportunity to really bridge the divide between research and practice, which is something that is super, super important. And yeah, that's my job, is kind of like an example of a career path that exists out there in the world. I didn't know this job existed before I started. But then just kind of like mapping out how I got here and how I got to be where I am today. So I did grad school and I did my master's at Memorial University and then a PhD at UBC. And both my theses were very much not applied, and they were really more like fundamental ecology focused projects. I didn't have that kind of like applied experience in grad school, but kind of towards the end of my PhD, I kind of realized that I didn't really want to be a professor. And I kind of wanted to do more applied focused works. And I didn't really know what kind of non-academic career options were out there for an ecologist. So I kind of looked at opportunities that my university offered to kind of gain some non-academic experience. So UBC and many other universities offer different internship programs like MyTax, you might have heard of. UBC has a program called the Bright Internship that allow you to work with a non-academic organization as part of your program. And so I kind of did that right at the end of my degree, and I did an internship with the BC government in the Ministry of Forests. So if anyone has any questions about working in government, I can also speak to that experience as well. I was there for about 6 months. And so in this position, I was developing wildfire recovery policy recommendations for northeastern BC, again, kind of in those same fire complexes that I was talking about earlier in the work I'm doing now. And so this experience involved interacting with a lot of different people, including many different First Nations governments and also BC government staff and also different restoration practitioners. And so for me, this was really kind of like my first foot in the door of outside of the academic space, and it was really valuable. It kind of gave me, first it gave me a lot of clarity that like I kind of liked being in this more applied space. And it also gave me a lot of useful skills and a lot of valuable connections through interacting with all these different people while I was kind of working on the project I was doing. And so I kind of really used that opportunity as best as I could to kind of meet with as many people as I could from all those different parts to kind of like learn what their careers were like and also like learn about potential job opportunities. And obviously a lot of these conversations kind of like led nowhere, but one of these connections I was talking to at Fort Nelson First Nation kind of knew someone who was hiring, who works for them, and that's kind of really played a pretty critical role in kind of like getting that connection that opened the door to the job I'm working at now. So I think like a really big takeaway I got from my journey was just the value of kind of networking and just kind of talking to people as much as I can and being kind of open to potential opportunities that might arise. And just even like a short chat can potentially maybe go a long way. So that's kind of how I got where I am today. And then before this presentation, I was just doing some reflecting on how I got to be where I am and kind of some advice that I think might be helpful for people. Some of it might seem a little redundant. You've probably heard it before, but I do really think a lot of these things are really helpful for me getting my position now. The first was just trying and getting any kind of experience to kind of help get you foot in the door, even if it's just something short term or something you maybe feel a little overqualified for, or just collaborating with a non-academic for your thesis if that's an opportunity for you. My first position was an internship, and so it wasn't going a long-term thing, but it kind of gave me the chance to kind of make a lot of connections and have a non-academic reference and things that led to a lot of other opportunities. And so I really feel like that first thing was a really helpful launch point to kind of like loop and leap into kind of other different things. Another thing, I know you've probably heard this a bajillion times, but network, I remember being in a talk and someone was like, networking is important. I was like, oh my God, yeah, okay. But now I'm like, oh yeah, networking is important. I feel like even just a short chat with someone could like lead somewhere because every person you meet kind of, knows other people and so on and so forth. And there's just lots of potential branches and connections. And you kind of never know which could like pan out into something really interesting, whether that's like at a conference or like coordinating informational interviews or anything like that. You just kind of like never really know. The next was really about like taking time to reflect on like all the broad skills you've kind of developed in grad school beyond research. I know Gillian kind of talked about this, like we do so many things in grad school and so many of those things are super useful in the non-academic world. So like interpersonal skills, being able to think critically and address problems. Also, you might have experience in conflict management. Maybe you've had like tricky situations as a TA or as a collaborator that you've had to navigate, and project management experience is also really valuable. And being able to communicate that throughout a hiring process, I think is like really helpful and kind of just like really thinking broadly about like what's involved in your grad school experience. Also, it's just being adaptable and open-minded about opportunities as they like might come along, even if they might seem kind of like not what you thought of at first. I didn't really know a job like mine really existed until I actually started it. And so like there are probably jobs out there that a lot of us haven't even heard of that might actually be a really rewarding career path for you, you just don't know it yet. And also, I think it's really important to, as we've already talked about, even if you don't do applied research currently, if you're in grad school right now, to still be able to kind of connect research to these real world settings. And because many of these non-academic jobs do have an applied focus. And again, I didn't have an applied focused grad school experience, but I still was able to kind of communicate that skill. I think still being able to demonstrate that skill is important, even if it's not necessarily part of your thesis research. And then lastly, I think people really notice those who are like really engaged and enthusiastic and genuine during these hiring processes. And I know people want to work with people who are excited to be there and kind of like a good cultural fit. And I think a positive attitude goes a long way. And I don't know, maybe this sounds kind of obvious, but but not everyone does this. And I like sometimes people will be like, oh, that really, really stood out. So that's something to really keep in mind. Anyway, that was a lot of points at once, and this is definitely a lot of text, but I think there are a lot of exciting career paths out there in ecology and evolution, and hopefully this webinar has some helpful insights to find what's best for you. But yeah, happy to take any questions during the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was wonderful. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Kelly Zenkiewicz, who holds a Bachelor's of Science in Biology and is a strategic communications leader at Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, where her passion lies at the intersection of advocacy, science communication, and storytelling. She also has a background in biological sciences, but also nonprofit communications and journalism. So I'm excited to see what she has to say.
Hi, y'all. So first of all, some really great thoughts from Katie and Gillian so far. I find a lot of what they're saying is super relatable. So hopefully you all are finding some nuggets in what we're sharing today. So my official title is Senior Communications and Digital Engagement Manager at Yellowstone Yukon Conservation Initiative, the long one. But I'm always uncertain if it actually reflects my role, because what I like to say, what I do is tell stories with science seasoning. That's what I say. So perhaps it's appropriate to start with a story then, which is about my spark moment, right? So we're going to go back to my undergrad days at the University of Alberta in the early 2000s. Was under 25, wandering around campus, trying to figure out how to turn being a good high school student into being a good university student. And my best friend's sister goaded me into writing for the campus paper, The Gateway, since she was editing it that year. Begrudgingly, I went to some seminars and I kind of learned about rewrites, leads, inches, paraphrasing all these things about being a good journalist. And so one of my first assignments was to interview a leading biologist about squirrel genetics, Dr. Stan Booten. Some of you may have heard of him. So after the interview, I was getting into the elevator in that terribly scary biosci building, and I dropped my mini tape recorder. So the tape, it was a physical tape, if you imagine like one of those tiny ones that are in like spy movies from the 70s. It went rocketing down the gap between the elevator car and the floor and down several floors until the elevator shaft. And the doors were sort of closing slowly, dramatically, and I was panicking. So I had three choices. I could give up. I could track down the building maintenance crew to try and fish the tape out of the shaft, or I could go back to Dr. Booten's office and ask for a redo. And so I chose number three. I had an even better interview, and I got my first front page article published in next week's Gateway. So as it turns out, though, I was actually pretty awkward at and anxious about interviewing, which made me a terrible journalist. But the stint did confirm my love of writing and research. And so later I graduated with my degree in biology and a minor in English. But most of my early professional working life really leaned more into the world of communication, not conservation. So the reason I share this story is because I think it represents what I want you or any person sort of considering their next steps in life to know. That networking, curiosity, and expanding skills you doubt you have are essential to finding out what to do next. And it's the path you least expect that may lead somewhere fantastic. So it was the people I met and my time writing for the Gateway and experience with Photoshop, literally, like I was able to open and operate Photoshop and photography. I developed these skills at a summer job scanning and digitizing 18th century chapbooks for Canada Research Council projects. So like sidebar on that, was a really wonderful summer, but very odd. All of that was directly responsible for me applying for a job on a lark. To what was really thrilling to me at the time, it was a job photo desking at the Edmonton Journal to cover parental leave. And so these photos are me of the newsroom there. That eventually became web editing and later other work at the Calgary Herald. And so I don't know if it was the trauma of losing that tape and redoing an interview or my general dislike of the phone, but I never really enjoyed interviewing people and I never became a fully fledged journalist. But luckily, there's lots of other roles at a newspaper. And so this sort of leads me to the next stage, which is after years in newsrooms, I realized I really wanted to use my communication skills for something more mission driven. And I wanted to tie it back to my education. And so I'd always loved the outdoors and cared about conservation. And of course, I had my degree. But I didn't think there was a place for someone like me, someone without a master's or a PhD or even field research experience. But it turns out that conservation organizations desperately need people who can communicate well, learn fast, and bridge the gap between scientists and the public, especially if you've seen Gillian and Kitty talk about today. And so I like to say my work is science adjacent, I guess. And this all comes together, not really with a bang or any thoughtful or well-organized plan, honestly. I applied cold to the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative when a job posting appeared in the local newspaper. Newspapers come up a lot in my life. And of course, it helped that I was living locally at the time. And so I got my job at Why Do I specifically because of my media relations experience, good news sense, and my ability to understand how the news world worked. But more importantly, it was because I could talk to scientists and get at the heart of their research, thanks to my time on the science beat and sort of due to my science literacy developed during my undergrad. So just to diverge here for a second to talk a little bit about more about Why Do I. We're a trans-border organization working to connect and protect habitat across 3,400 kilometers from the greater Yellowstone ecosystem up to Yukon territory. And we support partners who share our vision of connecting and protecting habitat so that people and wildlife thrive in 3 programs: landscape protection, wildlife connectivity, and human-wildlife coexistence. And so a paper in 2021 documented our impact, which was an 80.5% increase in protected areas in our region from 1993 to 2018. And so this is a photo of me during a film shoot about wildlife crossings in the fall. And this is probably as close to field work as I've ever gotten. Here I am carrying some wildlife cameras, which we were doing for one of the setup shots. And I've been at Why Do I for 9 years now. Our communications team, has grown from just me to 4 members now. And my core work has remained pretty much the same, however, which is storytelling about conservation successes and challenges, translating jargon and super technical language to share in media releases, newsletters, social posts, and donor appeals, inspiring people to take action, and the less glamorous but still essential pile of work that I like to call tech trash, which is data management and database work that keeps everything running. So I spend a lot of time on our website and lots of other places working on things behind the scenes. And so that's a quick peek of my career arc. But I just wanted to share 3 things that I hope will help some of you with your decisions ahead. And so first is that your path will be messy, and that's totally normal. Sometimes I was underemployed. Sometimes I was the oldest intern in the room. My LinkedIn profile tells a very carefully curated story, but it doesn't show the gaps. So like when I came home from teaching English in Japan and didn't want to work in the news industry again, or when I launched a passion project about Vegas weddings, hoping it would pay the bills, which it did. Resumes don't show those mistakes, uncertainty, or the false starts, or the forced pivots, and that's okay. I think it's important for people to be kind with themselves if it feels like there isn't a perfect position that ticks all the boxes immediately. Apply for jobs that you're 80 to 90% of the way there for, and just hope you do well in the interview. I think those messy parts are where you learn the most. I also recommend people do your side quests. They become your competitive advantage. So I love video games like Fallout, Mass Effect, and The Witcher. And if you play these, you know that they're full of side quests, missions that aren't part of the main storyline, but they let you explore the world differently and build up your skills and resources, right? So your career works in the same way. I think that some of the skills you've acquired make you stand out, even if it seems unrelated or wasn't career related. Some of those examples that Gillian highlights, I think, are obviously highly applicable here. And so sometimes it pays to be less of a specialist when you're starting out. An advanced degree can open some doors, but sometimes it's the add-ons that make you stand out and turn you into more of a Swiss Army knife. So even today, I'm always looking for ways to level up my skills from management to technology. And I was listening to a podcast recently. So Stephen Dubner of Freakonomics fame was talking about building a comparative advantage or finding something that you're a little better at than most people that is already something that lights you up. So it might not guarantee the money or recognition, but it can make you stand out in the hiring process or the workplace. And side quests are great for exploring these skills. And so GIS or mapping, grant writing, video production, or even plain language editing, I think are really great skills to explore. And for me, those side quests were everywhere. I think they taught me things about management process, time management, that kind of thing. My irritation at reading super technical papers turned me into a lover of plain language writing. So all those things, I think they didn't seem connected at the time, but when I put them together, they made me unique. And so science literacy plus communication skills plus project management became invaluable in conservation communications. So volunteer, try side projects, offer to write one blog post for a conservation org, help with social media for your department's outreach event, or become a speaker for a local naturalist night. Just like Katie said, I think these things help you get a foot in your door somewhere. And you'd be surprised what becomes relevant later, as some side quests can become the main feature. I think that being intersectional is a superpower. And so point number 3 is figure out what you don't want to do, which is just as valuable as knowing what you do want. The one thing I learned early in undergrad is that I did not want to work in a lab, and academia didn't feel like a fit for me. Also, that biochem was hard, and so my dream of being a geneticist was pretty much gone. But I did know that I loved writing and reading, so I found a way to tie those together. So these 3 things are actually great news because they help build a complete picture, I think, beyond your degrees. And organizations, nonprofits, labs, and companies are increasingly looking for people with diverse skills and combinations of experience. And I know family doctors with computer science degrees and lawyers who were crime journalists or anthropologists and chemical engineers who were Red Seal chefs. And I think it's easy to idealize the perfect role that uses all of your skills and talents in the perfect way, but singular linear paths are becoming really rare in the work world. And being a generalist, or at least having several different skills, especially at smaller organizations, can be much more valuable than being hyper specialized. And of course, there's challenges to this as an advanced degree holder. Even if you have strong specific experience, I think it may be more valuable to showcase the breadth of skills you have. Then later you can go deep. And I think the one thing I want people to know is that you don't need a PhD in conservation biology to work at a conservation organization or nonprofit. But you do need to care about the work and bring skills that complement the team there. And I'll just share just some really great advice I got really early on in my career, which was that resumes in particular, just remember that they're marketing documents, not autobiographies. And so you don't have to show everything you've ever done. You can highlight what's relevant to the role and call it out in your cover letter or talk about it at the interview, and save other skills. Maybe some of those that you acquired during your side quests, like being great at TikTok videos or data visualization for the interview. That's when you can sort of really show what makes you stand out and make you different. So if I reflect back to the early 2000s and the day when the tape went rocketing down the elevator shaft, I couldn't have imagined that embarrassing moment would be part of a story I would tell decades later, honestly. And so just a note to say that you don't know what moments are going to matter later on in life and what pivot is going to turn into a beautiful, unexpected path, or what awkward conversation might lead you to your next opportunity. And so stay curious, try things, and don't be afraid to go back to the start when things go sideways. You can find me at this email, don't be a stranger. And I also just wanted to share that Y2Y has a careers in conservation webpage where we share many different opportunities in conservation in the Yellowstone to Yukon region and beyond. It's updated fairly frequently, and it can sometimes be a good source if you are job hunting. Good luck out there.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was wonderful. Okay, next up, we have our last speaker, Javier Ibarra-Isasi, who completed his PhD in biology at Concordia University and is now a coordinator of graduate research and thesis support programs at Concordia. Take it away, Javier.
Thank you, Takuchi, and thank you everyone else for that wonderful sharing of your paths. Like, it just makes me feel better that my path is also very messy, very non-linear, and I think I pivoted a couple of times throughout my career. So let me just share my screen really quickly here. All right. So just to start, like, I was reflecting a little bit on how to start my like little introduction here, and because I've been an ecologist for most of my life, and then I transitioned into becoming a higher ed admin, which you never think you trade the desk or the forest for a desk. So I found this picture when I was kind of thinking about things that this is a moment after I hiked up that volcano in Ecuador. And it just made me think of how difficult that was because it's like super high altitude and it's not a linear path. So you go and wind around different paths to be able to not tire yourself. And along some points, you stop and take a breather because you cannot go further up until you can continue. So that's kind of like a way of how I see the path that I've taken. Um, with metaphorical breaks, not actual breaks, because not too many vacations in my life. But anyway, so yeah, like Takuchi said, I'm the coordinator for graduate research and thesis support at the School of Grad Studies in Concordia University, where I did my PhD. So I literally transitioned from completing my degree to sitting behind the desk. And just to give you more detail on kind of what my path was, I'll try to summarize it like this. And first, I got like all the research training and all that usual academic training through doing my bachelor's in El Salvador, then moving to Brazil, doing my master's, and finally coming here to Canada to do my PhD. Throughout the way, I was very much interested, well, maybe not throughout, but for most of it, I was very much interested in ants. So I literally found out ants can pollinate, and I was like, how come this is the case? And so that's kind of like drove me throughout my degree to figure out what ants did, how ants, the species are around, why they are where they are. Basically, that's kind of like where I landed in my PhD. Then throughout all of those moments, I kind of focused on developing my communication skills. So I had the opportunity to go to conferences, so I took them as much as I could. Then I taught for most of my degree. So I was a private tutor, I was a TA, I was, I don't know, teaching different stuff. I even had the opportunity of being a course instructor here at Concordia before I graduated. So that gave me a lot of experience in communicating and sharing knowledge. And throughout that path, I actually discovered meaning in an alternative path. So I started to realize that I liked supporting students and that I liked helping people figure things out. And I also liked developing programs and kind of like being creative about approaches that I could help people achieve their goals in general. And so that's kind of like what happened in the middle of my PhD. And I became a workshop instructor for a program that's called Grad Pro Skills, and that's just a series of workshops and events that support graduate students in different skills, so from professional to academic skills. And so that's kind of where I kind of started my path into this student support program development side of things. And then suddenly I was probably 3 months away from graduating when I ran into the manager or then manager of the unit that I work in right now. And she told me like, oh, you know what? Actually, this person is leaving for like a year and a half. So I'm struggling. I need to find someone. I was like, why don't you give me a chance? Like literally an elevator ride up. I was like, hey, you're looking for someone. I might fit the task. So why don't you give me the chance? And she was like, yes. So thank you. Just tell me how much hours you can dedicate while I was finishing my PhD. So obviously that was very limited. But I managed. And so it was something that helped me land that temporary position, which eventually evolved into what I do right now. And so this literally made me dive headfirst into higher ed admin. And this is like I took this picture probably in December, so you can see the white hairs in the beard. So while I was jumped into higher ed, it was, I started doing coordinating programs, and actually the unit was losing people. Then the manager left 2 months after I joined. So it was like a matter of like dealing with all the chaos. So I literally became a manager coordinator for academic for support programs out of nowhere. And all the while I was trying to wrap up my PhD. So it was like, I don't know, I was a man of different minds back then. But this allowed me to really figure out that that was something that I really enjoyed doing, and gave me the opportunity to apply, my like some strategy and some leadership that I had acquired throughout my degree. And just one thing that I want to highlight here is that careers really often make sense only in reverse, not the other way around. Like when I'm looking back, like, okay, it makes sense. Now I built this and this and that. But then when you're in the middle of it, it might not make sense. So the advice of doing your side quests or doing projects and small projects here and there to test out things, that stands because you never know. You never know what you might find that you like. And just to kind of reiterate a little bit here on kind of like what I thought success would look like when I started versus what it became. And so what I expected was like, okay, I'm going to do all my academic degrees, and I'm going to be a researcher, and I'm going to enjoy doing research, and I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to have multiple publications, and I'll be, the Ant-Man. Although I still have that title because no one knows about ants in my office, but whatever. So academic specialization, I had that, and I wanted that, and I thought that was going to be what I was going to have. But and intense field work, of course, because I knew that was going to be a big thing, at least in my area of research. But then what I found meaningful throughout the way was like, okay, research. I really enjoy doing research, like asking questions and answering them. And then program design, I really kind of discovered that I like, really figure out points where I can fill a gap or a need to support students, and also help them develop their goals, as I mentioned. I also enjoyed kind of being able to make decisions and help people make decisions, and kind of work within a team and collaborate to make a vision come through. And through different ways of thinking strategy or being creative about it. And something that I also enjoyed was communicating. And so teaching or just communicating reports or all of that. And one of the main things that I also found meaningful is doing institutional change. Because if I can help students or support students through different ways, I can help change the institution's directions and ever so slightly. So it's not something that I did not leave my impact behind. It's just kind of, I changed the way I create the impact, or I generate this impact. So I impact students now, no longer ants. So just a couple of skills to highlight some of the skills that I acquired through my ecological training, and then that I find that employers value. The first one might be obvious, but it's research and analysis. And just to break it down a little bit, it's sort of learning how to synthesize information. So taking a bunch of documents and creating an abstract that people can understand. And then interpreting evidence, so gathering a bunch of data from across the board and just being able to talk about it and interpreting what the evidence means. And also, as others mentioned, solving problems. Like this is something that you learn throughout, and especially if you are a field ecologist, you kind of learn how to solve the problems on the spot, because the plan that you're doing for field work, that never works. So you learn to figure out stuff on the spot and be very resourceful. So you learn to solve messy problems. The other thing another skill that I acquired was communicating. And so presenting clearly or writing for different audiences, although most of the time in the academic path, you end up just doing publications, but you can divert a little bit and go for writing blogs or writing other stuff. And if you're more of a external communicator, you can also write op-eds, for example, as a researcher. That's something that media outlets appreciate, and so I highly recommend you look into it. And because you also acquire that capacity to translate complex ideas into more simpler terms, so So yeah, those are a couple of things. Then the other one, and this is a highly sought after skill, is project management. You don't realize, but your thesis, your research is a project and you're managing it. And you need to manage the timeline. You need to manage interested parties, especially if you work with communities. And then you also have to, manage competing priorities. So it's something that you need to learn what's urgent, what you need to prioritize in order to finish that project. So your research project can be a version of another project. So it's just a translation of that into a different project. And finally, systems thinking. This is a little bit more kind of abstract, but basically understanding how different parts connect, different parts of a system can connect across people, policy, institutions. So kind of looking at all the different parts and putting them all together and how they interact and how they can connect and influence with stuff. So that's something that I learned through my training in ecology. So it's really a matter of knowing that, the research your training is not narrow unless you describe it as narrow. And so it's something that you must take some time, because it does take time to reflect on how you're going to present, how you're going to talk about your skills. And a couple of things that help me more than, simple or just expertise alone. And first of all, is learning to talk about my skills in non-academic language. So not referring to, let's say, I don't know, a deep analysis that I did, let's say, NOVA, Permanova, whatever, like not talking about those sorts of analysis, but like more so like, oh, I did this analysis in which I compared, whatever it is. So it's more trying to tell people or let people know what sort of skills you've developed in non-academic vocabulary. Then this is kind of like similar to that side quest part. It's just taking roles that are adjacent, not perfect. So it's something that might not fit your profile perfectly, but it might be adjacent. And so you might as well just take it, see, and explore what's going on. And another thing that helped me is kind of just being open to leadership and making big decisions before feeling fully ready. Like that was something that I was definitely not prepared to, but it's like having that courage of jumping into it right away. And just one thing, that understanding that credibility, it can come from facilitation. It can come from, developing strategies. It can come from executing things. So it's not only because you've studied something for many, many years, it's that you become credible in something. You can develop that credibility by demonstrating through that execution. Okay. And just to wrap up, just to finalize with some 3 takeaways for maybe other ecologists that are in the audience that are interested in exploring some alternative paths. And first, it's don't wait for total certainty. I'll go into it into a few moments. Translate your value, and don't be afraid to redefine your impact. And so by not waiting for total certainty, you can test paths. Maybe there's opportunities that you can find. Don't be afraid to go through those small experiences to test them out and to see what's happening. And maybe you'll find something that you like. You'll find meaning in something that you didn't think you thought you'd find meaning. Then try to learn how to translate your value, because most employers, I would say, they will not understand what ecologist means, but they do understand what analysis, what coordination, what communication means, what being a manager means, what being, project management. So kind of translate the value that you have into those words so that they can understand what you can bring to the table. And finally, it's, don't be afraid to redefine impact, is that I really learned that I could support science, students, research, and institutions more broadly without being 100% in academia. So I'm kind of like have a sidestep into an admin role, but I still have done some cool research, some cool surveys. I still supervise students, although not on their research, but more on their research communication endeavors. So there's still a lot of support that I can give back. without being, a full professor or full academic. And maybe just don't forget that one of the greatest skills that we learned during, being a field ecologist in particular, but in general, being in grad school is improvising and adapting. That's something that, the plants are never going to go your way. So learning to improvise is a very, very, very sought after skill in a lot of institutions and organizations. And just to wrap up, if nothing works out, just sharing, the modeling career is always there. So I was recently taking this picture. And so, yeah, just to give you some maybe hope that if ecology or whatever else is not for you, who knows? Maybe a modeling career is in the books and the cards for you. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Javier. That was amazing. I'm so happy to hear your story in full. I will open up for questions. So we're running a bit behind schedule. So we have technically 5 minutes for questions, but I'm hoping some of the panelists could stay a bit longer. If not, then feel free to email us if you would like. So for anyone who has questions, please feel free to either type in the chat or turn on your mic with raising your hand. Okay, I guess I can start with one general question for all the panelists. If you were to highlight any resources that were most useful to you when looking for a non-academic job, do you have any suggestions?
I can start chiming in. Something I actually found really useful was like resources like this. So if you're here, you're already using resources that are useful, but like a lot of universities have resume writing workshops or cover letter writing workshops and things that are geared towards grad students who have done a research-based thesis. And so I did those at UBC and I found those really like amped up my like application process. So like those are really helpful. Just like knowing what resources are available for you at your university or through CSE.
I could build off that, Katie. We a lot of the jobs that I've found that look interesting and like where we would post at CPAWS was goodwork.ca, which is the green jobs posting board. Another resource that I have found really helpful, just especially I think for me, uh, if you're still kind of exploring if a nonprofit or like the NGO space is something that appeals to you, there are a lot of resources that you can check out that kind of just give you an idea of what it's like, and you can kind of see like test the waters, do some side quests. But Sustainability Network sends really good resources out. So they'll do weekly digests, but also monthly digests for all of the workshops that they host and webinars they host, but also kind of like a nice broad scope of what everything else is happening in that space. So I can put some links in the chat. Sustainability Network, I've done a ton of their workshops. They're really amazing. And the Compass, like SciComm workshops are really good. So that's not maybe necessarily job boards related, but just in terms of like refining skills and opportunities to develop those different kinds of assets is also a really good option.
I think one resource that I really relied on was sort of remembering to collect the clips and things that I did from side quests. So, all the writing that I did, or if you were to do something for another organization, let's say, keeping the evidence of that to point back to, I think that's really great to sort of boost your resume, so to speak. So it's like not technically a resource that I would point to, but just a thing I would do. But I think also job postings in general are really good just to look at, even if you're not job hunting, because it kind of highlights the skills that are in demand and how you might want to tweak your resume or cover letter at a certain point too. So I always say like a prey on the Serengeti, I'm always scanning the horizon for predators and for new jobs. So good to keep your eyes up.
Uh, just quickly wanted to share a resource that I probably discovered already late when I was doing my admin position. But it's what it's called an IDP. It's an individual development plan. If you've never heard of those, that acronym. And so there's different tools across the board, but one that's specifically designed for scientists, it's called My IDP. And so that really helps folks identify, certain skills, certain values that they have and interests. So that's something that can help you with some questions to identify certain skills and values that you have. I'll put a link in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. I'm just waiting to see if anyone has any comments in the chat. Oh, Sabrine, yes, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank the host and the panelists for a wonderful, wonderful presentation and sharing of their experiences. As a mature student who went back to school to pursue graduate studies after 10 years of working in all kinds of sectors, I worked in the public sector, NGOs, I worked in the private sector. So it's kind of comforting to hear that people experts have had the same kind of path to their careers. It's like they mentioned there was a lot of meandering, a lot of kind of zigzagging, and so I'm glad I'm not the only one. But I did want to mention because some people wanted to know if there are other ways to tap into resources. If you're a student, if there are clubs, societies, or organizations on campus that are sustainability related or green industry related, by all means, you can volunteer. That's one thing that I made sure to do this time around. I was too busy back when with young children to have the time to do that. But this time around, I was like, okay, I got to tap into this. And I was able to meet some wonderful, wonderful people through just, being part of the events and those initiatives. So yeah, that's all. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. Wonderful presentations.
Thank you, Sabrine, for sharing. And also for sharing that great tip. Yeah, I think student organizations are a great way to kind of diversify who your network, but also like skill sets and transferable skills and just different perspectives. I think it's great. Anybody else with any questions? Do any of the panelists have to go? It's 4:02, so I understand if that's the case. Okay, maybe I'll ask one more question. If we don't have any from the audience, do you have any advice on how graduate students can use their time efficiently, I'm putting this in parentheses, in order to develop the necessary skills or network for a non-academic career?
I can start. I guess I already kind of talked about it a bit in my talk, but a lot of universities like offer different things like a My Tax internship, and also different organizations have different things like I know the BC government has like a graduate level co-op you can do, and so these are opportunities to get paid work experience part-time during your degree, and then you can like replace TAing with that. So it's kind of the same thing, but instead of TAing, you're getting some non-academic experience. And I know that there's some of them are not very well advertised, but they are like out there. You just might have to do a little bit of digging, and that's definitely like a very efficient way to like keep doing your degree and all your progress, but you're just kind of doing non-academic work instead of TAing.
Mine was related to something that Javier shared, right, which was that idea of translating what you do that makes it applicable to the job you're applying to. And I think that's a really low time investment, high impact thing to spend some time doing, to really consider the place that wants to hire you and how they're not going to know what skills you have necessarily, but taking the time to translate for them and highlight it really strongly in your cover letter or your resume CV is really important, I think.
Yeah, I think similarly, um, thinking back on your where you're at right now, what kind of work you're doing, and like again, similar to what was in Javier's presentation about like really identifying what you like about exactly what you're doing can help kind of guide you towards that. To me is like what can make something efficient is if you know, if you have a good sense of where you want to go, what kinds of things you like doing, and that's what you're looking for in the next job, that can help really guide you as well. And so taking the time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to just like write down what are the things you like doing, whether they're the activities and then like what is it about that you like? Is it being collaborative? Is it the strategic thinking? Is it, you know, talking with influential people? Those kinds of things I think can be also really powerful.
And maybe just to add a little bit, one thing is the prompt is to do efficient use of your time, which is, it's always difficult. But I think one of the things that really help people is to just have that moment of exercise, of do the exercise of envisioning yourself, let's say, what sort of where you want to be, where you want to go at this point in time, of course, like you never know, but then, I don't know, envision yourself in 5 years where you want to be and try to identify what sort of skills you have right now, and then what skills you'd need to get you there to where you envision yourself. And that way you can find some of those gaps and target, those trainings, those podcasts, those videos, whatever it is, to go and develop those skills that you feel might get you into a better place, into what the best version of yourself that you're envisioning. So that's one way I would think of using efficient use of your time to train and not go and take everything that's out there, because that's probably not as efficient.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. Efficiency isn't always about doing things in no time, but about taking the time to do this things right and then informing your later decisions. Yeah. So unless we have any other questions in the chat or with a raised hand, I want to thank the panelists again for their amazing presentations and their insights into non-academic careers. And thank you all for attending. Thank you.